Hi, my name is Madison Ellers, and today I'm going to be focusing on facial prosthetics and art after World War I. Before we begin, I would just like to warn everybody that some of the pictures of the deformities of these veterans are a little gruesome at times. There is no doubt that World War I had devastating effects across Europe. Mass destruction, families being ripped apart, and millions dead were just some of the heartbreaking tragedies following the war. For those that did survive, many came home with permanent physical damage, whether through loss of limbs or deformities. As a result, there was a need after the war for a solution for those whose faces had become severely damaged in battle. Men would have missing jaws, noses, and even eyes. Luckily, there were people like Anna Coleman Ladd, a leading figure in the creation of facial prosthetics for veterans, to help these men. There are many photographs of Anna Coleman Ladd's prosthetics, as well as videos of her work. Unfortunately, there are no titles to these photographs, but scholars do know that they were published in the Anna Coleman Ladd papers and are stored in the archives of American art. These photographs are important because they illustrate the massive impacts these prosthetics could have on these men's appearances, and therefore their lives. In terms of more traditional media, the most prominent painter to depict facial prosthetics at the time was Otto Dix. His painting, created in 1920, The Scat Players, Card-Playing War Invalids, depicts three men with deformities and prosthetics playing cards around a table. While facial prosthetics fall into the category of medical science, they can also be considered as art. This is especially true when we look at the background of Anna Coleman Ladd, one of the leading sculptors of facial prosthetics after the First World War. Anna Coleman Ladd did not begin her career in the medical field, but rather as a sculptor. This artistic background was a great help to her, because it allowed her to create more lifelike and perfectly designed individualized prosthetics. Prosthetics would be made to help restore men's faces back to normal after they had been severely altered from battle. In Ladd's studio, these prosthetics could take weeks or even months to make. The copper masks would be molded to the face and then painted with hard enamel. Oftentimes, Ladd would paint the masks while it was attached to the man's face so that she could produce the best possible color match. It would then typically be held up by eyeglasses. Two unnamed photographs of her work were published in the Anna Coleman Ladd papers and stored in the archives of American art. These photographs show the men before and after applying prosthetics. In doing so, it demonstrates how great an impact these prosthetics had in altering one's appearance. Both of these men are missing large chunks of their jaw and mouth in the left picture. In the picture on the right, however, there is no noticeable difference in their appearance from a man one would see walking down the street. These prosthetics are so naturalistic that they completely alter their appearance. While the man on the left would receive stares while out in public, the man on the right would not even be given a second glance. The idea of not being stared at and not drawing attention to the wounded man's disfigurement is the entire motivation behind the creation of these masks. Therefore, the concept behind these masks is essentially denial. After the war, the main goal of the public was to move forward and forget the deep suffering that their country had experienced. These men, with their deformities, served as walking reminders to everyone around them of the war and its lasting effects, including to themselves. In a time where everyone wanted to forget the war, they were a constant reminder of it. By covering up their faces, these men were deciding, whether consciously or not, to deny and forget the lasting effects of the war. By covering up their physical scars, they were, in effect, also covering up the emotional scars. This was partially for their own sake. Not only would they receive stares, but every time they looked in the mirror, they would be reminded of their trauma. The prosthetics served to grant them a sense of normalcy and comfort. That said, these prosthetics also served the comfort of others. When the men wore these prosthetics, they engaged in a form of self-censorship to make others feel at ease around them. Some believe that wearing these masks were against the modernist spirit of accepting and embracing change. Some say that the inability to accommodate growth, change, and emotion rendered the masks futile for any purpose other than to hide the traumatic sight of a familiar face ruined by the events of the war. This criticism might be fair when directing it at the general public that may have encouraged the facial prosthetics, but it is unfair when directed at the veterans. Looking back, it is easy to say that these men should have embraced change, but at the time it was the easier choice. These men had undergone deep emotional trauma, and it is entirely understandable that they would want to cling to some sense of normalcy after the world had been completely altered. Sometimes denial is understandable, but it is all one can do to stay sane. While the facial prosthetics' purpose was to help people forget the war, Otto Dix's goal was to remind people of the war. Unlike the general public, Dix did not shy away from the horrors of battle, but rather embraced them. After being drafted in World War I and experiencing the terrors of war firsthand, Dix became fiercely anti-war and anti-military. Many of his pieces after World War I focused on the gruesome terror of battle and can be described as angry and fatalistic. In 1924, he published a series of works titled War, in which he made 50 etchings depicting the death and terrors of the war. He became associated with the New Objectivity movement and went on to create the piece The Scat Players, card-playing war invalids. In this work, Dix depicts 3 veterans playing cards. The 3 men have a multitude of disfigurements from the war, such as missing limbs, eyes, ears, and jaws. Some of the men are playing cards with their feet because they are missing arms, while one has a tube where his ear should be. In this collage and painting, Dix is shoving in the viewer's face the lasting marks that war can leave on a person, making them confront what they're so ready to forget. There is no avoidance of reality in this piece, but rather harsh acceptance. Like real veterans, these men in the painting have been removed from battle, but they cannot escape the effects of the war in everyday life. Dix wants the viewer to feel uncomfortable and slightly repulsed. This should not be an easy piece to look at. Unlike the real-life prosthetics, the one in the painting do not look half as natural. It is clear that these men have prosthetics. There is no hiding their scars. It is clear that Otto Dix and Anna Coleman Ladd had very different approaches to dealing with the aftermath of the war. While one sought to cover up, the other chose to confront. However, both had profound effects on people's ability to cope with and process their emotions after the war. Otto Dix ensured that people never forgot the consequences of World War I, and as a result, he played a role in preserving history. On the other hand, Anna Coleman Ladd helped restore comfort and normalcy to those who were suffering. While they had drastically different approaches, both figures played valid and crucial roles in post-war culture.